Hello everyone, welcome to Gnippets. My name is Germ, and today I wanted to talk about deformities. I injured myself many years ago. I was doing behind the neck split jerks with 225 because I used to be a fucking animal. And the thing with this exercise is that you do it behind your neck, right? So it's resting on your back, on your shoulders, and then you jerk it in the air. And I was doing this for multiple reps, so you had to catch it. So I would catch it, and on one of the catches, I missed. And the bar went too far, and I tore my bicep. And honestly, I think I tore a bunch of fucking shit, but I never, I never went to the doctor for it. And it kind of fixed itself. Your body is amazing. And it didn't help that at the time, I think I'd been working out like rigorously for like 9 days straight, like 2-a-days. I was taking my collegiate sport very seriously. I worked very hard in high school to get to where I was. And, you know, you go from being kind of this top dog, right? I was like top 30 in the state. I want to say I was a top 1,000 in the nation, but that seems too high. Definitely top 10,000. And so like, you're grinding, and college grinding is like different than high school grinding. So I'm doing like a college level, like basically like world-class elite level training with no rest days. Very stupid. And so I hurt myself, right? I tore my bicep and a bunch of other stuff, and I officially became deformed. It wasn't super obvious at the time just because I was a heavier set guy, and the strength that you lose from tearing your bicep isn't that much, and it doesn't really make sense to get it surgically repaired because it would just be purely cosmetic. But over time, my body started kind of contorting, let's say, or adjusting to the point that like my right shoulder started pulling back, my left shoulder started pulling forward, my right hip started pulling forward, my left hip started pulling back, and I kind of turned into like eventually this kind of hunchback because I'm missing a part of my arm. And it took me a long time to come to terms with being deformed because luckily it wasn't very visible yet, but now that I'm kind of losing weight, it's becoming more and more obvious. And also, since I'm working all the time, it's getting worse. The job I'm working now is very physically demanding, and it's getting worse. I can feel it getting worse. Sometimes, like really late at night, if I have like a really tough day, I can actually hear it like tearing. It's like kind of very quiet, like cutting of guitar strings almost. Like it's awful. And while I made my peace with being deformed, the peace that I made with it was much more rational, if that makes sense. It was more so like, you know what, like functionally my arm still works, I can lift it all through all the range of motions. I'm unstable in some kind of planes, but like generally speaking, I can do everything that I want to do. It's not super visually obvious, but internally I was accommodating for it, and I wasn't proud of it, right? It was kind of something, it was my first real like great mark of shame, like my first real mark of failure that's gonna be with me for the rest of my life. One of the silver linings of my arm getting worse now is that I can, since it's almost entirely gone now, my bicep or whatever, like it's getting worse. Like it's visually much more deformed than it was, but because of that, the rest of my body can kind of relax, if that makes sense. It's no longer trying to accommodate or like help this torn part of me, right? Now it's just kind of be like, hey man, it's gone. We gotta kind of go back to default because we're in pain too. It's been like 4 years. And there's such an interesting tie, I think, between like physical stress and mental stress, right? Because your body doesn't really understand the difference between those two things. But when I stopped trying to accommodate my bicep injury, I started standing up taller, I start pulling my shoulders and hips into the correct places. And that obviously kind of makes my bicep worse because it's no longer supporting it, right? But because I'm not hiding behind my injury anymore, it's almost making it better in the long run, if that makes sense, right? It's quite literally a physical manifestation of me like mentally improving. And now my deformity is kind of becoming something that I'm proud of. It is kind of opening up an avenues and making me realize just how bad the injury was. There is kind of that aspect, but I remembered as a kid, as a bit of a segue, whenever I would see people with deformities in shows or movies, I always thought they were the coolest, right? I remember there was this Hungarian movie my parents showed me called like Cat City or Mouse City or something, and the main bad guy had a ruby for an eyeball, right? He had like an eye patch, and under his eye patch was a ruby, and I thought he was like the coolest guy. I wanted to lose my eyeball, or like Rezanov in like Call of Duty World at War, right? Part of his finger was cut off, and I remember as a kid I wanted to cut off part of my finger to be like him, or even like the red guy from Foster's Home of Imaginary Friends, like very cool guy, I don't know if I wanted to lose an arm, but you forget in the moment how much having a disability kind of sucks. Like, I am in pain constantly. From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, some part of me hurts. Some part of me aches, right? I crack, I creak, I croak. But I don't regret it. I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I think of it as signs of a life well lived, right? It's pretty rare that I see someone in the wild who has an injury or some sort of mark on them, and I'm not interested. I think lesser of them. Sometimes I actually think the opposite, where I go like, man, I'm sure that's there's a fun story behind that, or it's almost like a way to differentiate people, where it's like, oh, like they have this cool, unique marking, regardless of whether they see it that way. But it's interesting. It's the first time in my life where I look at myself as damaged goods a little bit, and I don't mind too much.